been much confusion over facial recognition technology, and we're still continuing to see headlines where it's almost written as if every use of facial recognition will lead to surveillance. And so the Institute and our members have started a great collaboration on developing two explanatory graphics that really want to provide more clarification on these different use cases of facial recognition, and that there are also different levels of risks. And so we're taking this today into an on the pulse conversation, and I'm joined here by Stephanie Schuckers, who is the director of the Biometrics Institute. Hello, Stephanie.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Good to see you. So we're going to talk a bit about facial recognition biometrics and the various use cases. Now, we need to have a little caveat at the start, which is really that the use cases we are talking about here today are only examples. There are other use cases, and so this is by no means a definitive list. It would just be too much detail for the purpose of this graphic, which is really meant to be simple and clear to highlight some of the key considerations around facial recognition. And some systems may use one or more of these configurations. So let's have a look at these two graphics. So I'm going to share my screen so that we can talk about it a little bit more in detail. And of course, we have these graphics available on our website for download. And I know that already in the last few years, our members have used them extensively. And every year we're bringing them back for discussion, and we make them better and better. So this is the first one, Stephanie, which is the basic operating protocols. We entitled this graphic. So tell me, if you were to explain to someone what facial recognition is, what would you tell me?
Yeah, so I want to cover that kind of top yellow box there, basic biometric recognition operation. And there are two steps. What we're trying to do is we're comparing a capture that's been taken to a stored reference. And so there's always necessary some initial enrollment step, some initial piece of data that becomes that stored reference that later on you want to compare against. And so that's step one and step two. So it's sort of two pieces of data that come from step one and step two that lead to then the comparator, the thing that compares the two things, the thing that had been stored previously and the current capture, and then obviously leads to a decision. And this is, very fundamental building block of biometric recognition, but it can be quite complicated because it can be used in many different ways. And that's, I think, what we're going to cover.
So we have then below that set out the two main types of facial recognition, the verification mode and then the identification mode. Now, it took me a little while to understand that because terminology can be very confusing, but let's focus on verification, which also experts call the one-to-one. Now, in my world, it's easier to understand the question that we have put there. Am I who I say I am? So that's what we're looking at, Stephanie. So what are those use cases that we've selected here? Can you talk a little bit more about those?
Yeah, so the easiest to understand, of course, is in your mobile device because a large chunk of people use biometrics to log in their device. And in that case, your biometric is stored locally on your phone or tablet or other device. And then you come, it's your device, you're claiming it's your device, and it compares and says, oh yeah, it is you. So that's a very simple use case. Another use case that people are very comfortable with and familiar with would be your passport. Same idea, your data stored on your passport. You hand it over, the machine queries it, or a person even, and then you're compared against it. So you've kind of made a claim. There's one-to-one comparison. And this can be extended. It doesn't have to be just one person in the database. It can be, a database of a number of individuals, but you've made a claim, I want to get into my bank account, right? Or my ATM, say. And then you've made that claim by sticking in your card, and then the biometrics captured and only compared against you in the database that the bank might hold.
Perfect. That's really simple, isn't it? And I think that's what people did understand quite well, that this is me doing something here and I feel like I'm in control. And then we move into this area where it starts getting a little bit fuzzy in some ways, the identification mode, the one to many. And so again, for me, the question there is really brilliant. I'm thinking it's all about searching a database. Is the data subject in the database? Now, this is when it gets really interesting, isn't it? Because we have different levels here of risk we are addressing as well, I guess, in these different use cases. And that was the purpose really of this whole exercise. So tell me, we've got a range of things there. So it's all about that one person against searching against the database. So what are we having here, Stephanie?
Yeah, so if we kind of start on the left, it's really very similar to what we were doing when we were doing verification, except it's the data is typically stored in a database. So imagine, an access point, a door, right? You don't want to necessarily have to make a claim, right? I'm Stephanie, and then it goes pull Stephanie's template or reference. What we want to be able to do is just like walk up the door and the door opens. Well, in order to do that, given that multiple people may have access to that door, it has to search through the database to find the match, right? The closest match. Do you match anyone in the database or not? Then the door doesn't open. And so that's kind of that first, set of couple blue boxes there, because a lot of things can work that way. Boarding an airplane, you can search all the people who have access or have the boarding pass to go to the airplane, and you don't have to pull out your boarding pass. Again, you don't have to provide anything, just searches the database, boom, you get access. Then you start to move kind of to the right to some other interesting use cases. Deduplication is kind of a big word, but really what it's doing is your system, say, for example, it's an identity system for a government, right? And you've got a new person looking to get at an identity in the database. So the first thing it may do is search the whole database, number one, to ensure you're not already there under you, right? So now you wouldn't want two identities in a database. But the second thing it would search for is to make sure you aren't trying to commit fraud, i.e., trying to come into the identity system under a new identity. And so that's what deduplication is all about.
Really
And then,
important, yeah.
right, can be very useful. Moving on to screening. So what we're looking there is to kind of search a database to make a decision about an application. So now we're starting to move more into kind of forensic questions, right? Is somebody, say, for example, they've applied for a visa to go to a country, they'll be checked against a watch list to determine whether they should get access to the country. Then forensic search is actually quite different, because in a forensic search, usually some kind of crime has been committed. There's a piece of information, if we're talking about face, it would be a face image possibly captured in relation to the crime. And then you search a database, and that's meant for investigation, right? It needs to be combined with other information, prior to an arrest being made. And then we move to the last, which is the real-time search, otherwise sometimes called surveillance. And that's quite significantly different because of where the data comes from. It comes from, some camera that's just pointed at really anybody, right? So it's not about you walking up to a door and getting access or boarding a plane. It's just you walking down the street with potentially no knowledge it's even happening.
Yeah, and that is the particular use case that has raised a lot of concern. I mean, it is not easy to consume all of that and see the fine nuances, even when you just see that we're talking about access control in a verification mode, but we also have access control in an identification mode. So I'm not surprised some people, wouldn't have that level of expertise. So it's really important in our language and when we explain to the citizens what type of use we have here and be very clear there on the differences. So it's fascinating, Stephanie. I think that probably gives us enough on this slide. We have a second graphic that we're going to talk about in a separate conversation. And there will be a link to that as well from this one, I believe. There is obviously other material that is available, and not only from the Biometrics Institute. There's many other organizations that provide guidance around performance and testing of facial recognition and other technologies, but also questions around privacy and the issues on consent and the questions of the scope creep and how to address that, which is all relevant, obviously, to what we've just talked about here. So there will be a further reading list as well that we will share, good practice framework from the Institute that then points to other reference points as well, where you can get information, our 3 laws of biometrics. We have done work on vulnerabilities that you, Stephanie, were involved in. Lots of information to tap into, but thank you so much, Stephanie. I love this. Really simple to walk away with a very clean explanation. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.